But now the time is 7:30, and it's a very special night on BBC Radio 3 and in the UK as we launch the BBC's thrilling, thoroughly ambitious annual musical marathon. Let's cross live to the Royal Albert Hall in London and join Petra Trelawney.
Welcome to the first night of the 2012 BBC Proms. In the spirit of this Olympic year, this evening sees a musical relay with the baton passed between a quartet of great British conductors, leading music by four great British composers. First up, the composer Mark Anthony Turnage and the conductor Edward Gardner, music director at English National Opera. An opening flourish in the form of a fanfare called Cannon Fever. Played by the brass of the BBC Symphony Orchestra, Edward Gardner takes his place on the platform to launch the BBC Proms 2012. The world premiere of Cannon Fever by Mark Anthony Turnage, brass and percussion from the BBC Symphony Orchestra, conducted by Edward Gardner. Mark Anthony Turnage taking a bow from the stalls here at the Royal Albert Hall, an oft-heard figure at the Proms, hammered out, a relic of memory, and from the wreckage amongst his works that have been premiered here. Cannon Fever, a play on the phrases cannon fodder and cabin fever, commissioned to mark the 20th birthday of BBC Music magazine. Well, Edward Gardner will return later this Friday night to conduct Elgar's Coronation Ode, when he'll be joined by a starry lineup of soloists: Susan Gritton, Sarah Connolly, Robert Murray and Gerald Finley. The Coronation Ode, which includes an early version of Land of Hope and Glory, was written for a gala the night before the coronation of King Edward VII. It was then revised for George V. So, in what is after all a Jubilee year, we're also going to hear a piece tonight written for a future king, Michael Tippett's Suite for the Birthday of Prince Charles, composed in 1948. Martin Brabbins will lead that. Mark Elder conducts Delius, the most exotic Englishman in the first night of the Proms, born 150 years ago, the first of 8 of his works this season, Seadrift, which will be sung by Bryn Terfel and the BBC Symphony Chorus. And in a few moments' time, the concert continues with Roger Norrington directing a salute to London. As the world's athletes arrive here, the city is one of the themes of this year's Proms. We're going to hear Elgar's overture, Cockaigne, subtitled In London Town. Well, earlier we brought all 4 conductors together to discuss the idea of a musical baton race, starting with the youngest, Edward Gardner.
It's great to have conducted the last night of the Proms and conduct the first piece in the first night of the Proms this year. And it's a real sprint. It's a wonderful 3-minute fanfare, which actually is about my time at school for the 100 metres, so it's just about right. And as a youngest member of this relay team, I get to do the last piece as well, Elgar's wonderful coronation ode, and it's great to be part of this occasion.
Well, I should be the oldest and the slowest, I suppose, because I am the oldest. But it's just wonderful to have such bright and brilliant pieces of Cockaigne to do again. And I think it's the 4th time I've conducted it at the Proms, amazingly enough. The 2nd time with this orchestra. It's just a gorgeous piece, and I love to play it in a big, gorgeous Victorian hall. And now I'm going to hand you over to Sir Mark.
My round in this great battle race is more reflective. It's more tender, full of longing, full of loss. One of the most beautiful works in the repertoire, Seadrift by Delius. And I'm happy to take the baton from my dear colleague, Sir Roger Norrington. And we're going to not run through this piece, because it cannot be a race, but we're going to drift through it. And my baton is very special to me, because my batons were made for me by a remarkable man who plays the timpani in the Metropolitan Opera. And he's been doing that job for over 50 years. And he can tell the length of a baton at 50 yards, because he came up to me and he said, "Oh, maestro, is that a 12 or a 12 and a half?" And I said, "I'm not sure. What do you think?" He said, "I think it's a 12 and a half. I think you need a 13, he said. And when he makes these batons, he does them beautifully. He writes his signature, tiny, tiny, tiny signature, Dick Horowitz, on the end of the baton with the date, immaculately. So every baton has a special individual date on it. And that helps me to carry the baton onwards in this great race. And now let me pass it on to my friend and colleague, Martin Brabbins.
It's wonderful to be back at the Albert Hall doing the first night of the Proms. Amazing honour and thrill. I'm normally accustomed in my youth to being the anchorman in a relay, the 4th leg that brings the baton home, always in first place. But this time I've got to get used to the idea of being 3rd. I'm taking the baton from Sir Mark Elder and handing it on to Ed Gardner.
Martin Brabbins. Before him we heard Mark Elder, Roger Norrington, and we started with Ed Gardner. Well, the players of the BBC Symphony Orchestra en masse now, taking their position on the Royal Albert Hall stage. The singers of the BBC Symphony Chorus already in place behind them, surrounding the bust of Sir Henry Wood, founder of this great music festival. How wonderful to see the arena once again packed with prommers. Every seat, every box full for this first night of the Proms, which continues now with Sir Roger Norrington conducting Cockaigne, Elgar's tribute to our capital city.
I love this piece. It's so strong, it's so incredibly musical, it's absolutely brilliantly scored. He uses everybody in the orchestra, and he, as usual with Elgar, the tunes don't just come on the first violin, they come on the second violins, and they come on the viola, and they come on the clarinet, and all over the place, and beautifully, beautifully scored. He must have loved doing that. It's a marvellous portrait of the city of London in 1901, perhaps at that point the most important city in the world.
And surely about to be the most important city in the world again, as the eyes of every continent focuses on London with the start of the 2012 Olympics, the Proms part of the 2012 London Olympic Festival. Roger Norrington very keen to point out the Cockney influences on this piece. Cheerful and Londony, stout and stakey, as Elgar himself put it. He dedicated Cockaigne to my many friends, members of Britain's orchestras. As he told one of those colleagues, Hans Richter, the conductor, "I intend this piece to be honest, healthy, humorous and strong, but not vulgar." So Roger Norrington makes his way to the front of the Royal Albert Hall platform. BBC Symphony Orchestra rise to their feet. We hear Elgar's Overture Cockaigne in London Town. Elgar's Cockaigne, Sir Roger Norrington conducting the BBC Symphony Orchestra at the first night of the 2012 Proms. Rather appropriately, there's just one flag being waved in the arena tonight, and it's the 5 Olympic rings against a white background. Roger Norrington taking us on a journey through the byways and highways of London with whistling errand boys, lovers strolling in a park, marching band. Wonderful to hear the sound of the great Royal Albert Hall organ, augmenting the instruments of the BBC Symphony Orchestra. Henry Wood used Cockaigne to open the 1927 season of the Proms, the first season that the BBC were involved in. Thus it became the first piece ever broadcast from the Proms. Well, we move from Conductor 2 to Conductor 3, Sir Mark Elder next. It's 150 years since the birth of both Debussy and Delius. Their anniversary is the subject of major celebrations this season. Debussy's Pelléas et Mélisande on Sunday night, and next tonight, Delius's Sea Drift, a setting of words by Walt Whitman. A lonely boy observing a pair of nesting and mating seagulls, which to him represent the perfect union of love until one dies. The words will be sung tonight by the BBC Symphony Chorus and Bryn Terfel.
As the narrator who takes the voice of the young boy and also of the he-bird, it creates a specific atmosphere of bringing the sea into the Royal Albert Hall. And Delius's music, it was fascinating yesterday to rehearse it without the choir, first of all, and to hear those wonderful melodies and harmonies that he creates. Somehow reminded me of the Wagnerian Walküre. And the story in itself is nearly a Tristan and Isolde kind of love outpouring and that lost love. I've been a little boy walking the seaside without shoes on my feet, the wind in my hair, looking at those seagulls, and it's a heart-wrenching piece of wonderful descriptive colouring. You know, it's a privilege to be a part of it. And it's 25 minutes.
Well, the work really is incredibly poignant at the end. Loved the male bird sings 5 times, but my mate is no more with me, we two together no more. Talk of Delius as being an English composer, but as illustrated by this work, it's more complicated than that. Born in Bradford of German stock, he lived in Florida. He's setting an American poet in this piece. Wrote the music living in France. It was premiered in Essen in 1906 and first heard in the UK 2 years later in Sheffield. Bryn Terfel makes his way onto the platform. What a big man he is, dominating this stage with Sir Mark Elder. Shake hands with Stephen Bryant, leader of the BBC Symphony Orchestra. Delius's Sea Drift.
the he-bird to and fro, near at hand, and every day the she-bird crouched on her nest, silent. With bright eyes, and every day I, curious boy, never too close, never disturbing them, cautiously peering, absorbing, rivers and mountains from home. Till of a sudden may be killed, unknown to her mate. One forenoon the she-bird crouched not on the nest, nor returned that afternoon, nor the next, nor ever appeared again. And thenceforward all summer in the sound of the sea, and at night under the full of the moon, in calmer weather, over the hoarse surging of the sea, flitting from briar to briar by day, covers the remaining one, the heatherd, the solitary guest from yes, when the stars glisten all night long on the prong of a moss-scalloped stake, down almost amid the slapping waves sat the lone singer, wonderful, causing tears. On his mate, he poured forth the meanings which I of all men know. Yes, my brother, I know the rest might not, but I have treasured every note, for more than once dimly down to the beach, gliding silent, avoiding the moonbeams, blending myself with the shadows, recalling now the obscure shapes, the echoes, the sounds and sights after their swords, the white arms out in the breakers, tirelessly posting. I with bare feet, a child, the wind wafting my hair, listen long and listens to keep, to sing out translating the notes, following you, but my love soothes not me, soothes not me. Madly the sea pushes upon the land, Fathers, fathers, under that lying yellow waning moon, under that moon, where she droops, almost reckless, despairing what soft seeing clothes, soft, let me just murmur, and do you wait a moment? You husky noised I heard my maid responding to me so faint. I must be still to listen, but not altogether still, for then she might not come immediately to me. Either my love, here I am, with this just sustained note, I announce myself to you. This gentle call is for you, my love, for you.
Bryn Terfel singing Delius's Sea Drift. So Mark Alder conducting the BBC Symphony Orchestra. Sea Drift regarded by many as being Delius's finest achievement. BBC Symphony Chorus lining the back of the vast platform here at the Royal Albert Hall. Piece that Bryn Terfel recorded quite early in his career with Richard Hickox conducting. He was tweeting yesterday saying how much Richard Hickox had taught him about the piece. Well, 7 more works by Delius to come this Proms season, including the Violin Concerto, which Tasman Little will play on August the 23rd. And then on the last night, more of Walt Whitman's words set in the Songs of Farewell and sung by Joseph Kalea. Bryn Terfel returning alone now to the stage. Such a warm response to him from the audience, so much love. How wonderful to have him on this first night of the 2012 BBC Proms. Stephen Jackson, chorus director of the BBC Symphony Chorus, bringing his singers to their feet. Interesting how much Whitman's poetry inspired other English composers as well as Delius. Sea Symphony and Toward the Unknown Region by Vaughan Williams. Holst's Ode to Death as well. Mark Elder comes forward to take a bow. Having talked lots about this baton relay, actually Mark Elder decided to conduct that very late on without a baton. Decided he could get more feeling and more connection with the orchestra by using his bare hands. I suspect that the Proms can be a little more flexible in their rules than the Olympic Games will turn out to be. Bryn Terfel still celebrating the huge success of his Brynfest earlier this month at the South Bank. Botan at Covent Garden amongst his projects later this year. Well, if you've just joined us, welcome. Radio 3 live at the first night of the Proms, continuing after the interval in 20 minutes with 2 rarely heard works. Tippett's Suite for the Birthday of Prince Charles, and then Elgar's Coronation Ode, which right now is the subject of Stephen Johnson discovering music.
We just don't write music like this anymore. Crown the King with Life, the first words of Edward Elgar's Coronation Ode, written for the crowning of King Edward VII in 1902. The King had waited long for this moment. His mother Victoria had died in 1901, after a reign of well over 60 years. This was the beginning of a new age, the age that was to be called Edwardian, the era Elgar himself was to call glad, confident morning, in which he achieved the zenith of his career. The new king loved theatre and some of its actresses. He also loved sport and pageantry, and it made a very strong contrast with the austerity and propriety of so much of the Victorian age. The king had already shown a great interest in Elgar. In 1901, after the first performance of Elgar's famous First Pomp and Circumstance March, the two men met at a court reception in November, and it was the king who suggested to Elgar that the famous tune we now know as Land of Hope and Glory should really have words. It would go around the world, he said. So it was that in Elgar's new Coronation Ode, his most famous tune took its first steps towards acquiring the words by which it is now known around the world.
Land of hope and
Well, that's striking, isn't it? Because that's not quite the same version as we know now. The first two lines are the same, yet the continuation, by the poet Arthur Christopher Benson, is quite different. Truth and right and freedom, each a holy gem, stars of solemn brightness weave thy diadem. No hope there that the empire will spread wider still and wider. Still, the celebration of the imperial ideal is very much present. Indeed, it's central. This is an intensely idealistic piece in a way that may surprise some modern ears. We know so much now about the commercial motivation of the British, or is it English, empire-building mission, the subduing of often unwilling peoples and of horrors like the slave trade. But here we have a prayer. Only let the heart be pure, pure in steadfast innocence. And Elgar's music sounds so lovingly committed. But what about Elgar himself? Elgar was an intensely complicated man. He was full of paradoxes, contradictions, extremes of mood and opinions. It's clear enough that the Coronation Ode isn't just hackwork. Elgar really seems to be committed to it. There's some striking music, and even the reuse of the Land of Hope and Glory tune, by royal appointment you might say, doesn't simply sound like a rehashing of an old, or however serviceable, idea. The contralto Clara Butt had also asked Elgar for a version of the tune she could sing, and it's the contralto solo who leads off the finale, entitled Land of Hope and Glory. But Elgar's word setting is so much more than simply sticking words to a pre-existing tune. Let's listen to the familiar version first, as sung with gusto every year at the last night of the Proms. Now, I hate to sound carping in the face of enthusiasm like that, but did you notice how the words plod along to Elgar's march tune? Land of hope and glory, mother of the free. Now let's hear the Coronation Ode version. For a start, Land of Hope isn't quite the same. It's Land of Hope. And then comes a syncopation. Elgar's own version, to A.C. Benson's words, is more plastic rhythmically and even melodically. Even when it's taken up at the end by the full forces, the music still allows some give for the natural rhythms of the words. Now, of course, not everyone warms to music like that, especially accompanied by such sentiments, however genuine Elgar's own sympathies may have been. And I'm not just talking about those with their roots in former imperial territories. I remember an English composer friend of mine reacting to something very similar in one of Elgar's symphonies. "I will not be spoken to like that." And the remarks of an Irish composer I know are not repeatable on Radio 3. Yet it ought to be plain enough already that there's more to Coronation Ode than swaggering militarism or hearts of oak self-celebration. Let's have a look at the 6th of the 7 movements. It's a largely unaccompanied prayer for peace, gentle peace. Did you catch the line in there about smiling through thy tears? That's a very Elgarian sentiment. He described the theme in one of his more intimate works as smiling with a sigh. When it comes to Elgar's personal involvement in the Coronation Ode, how much is this a matter of straightforwardly subscribing to imperialist sentiments? We have to remember here that Elgar was an outsider. He was the son of a lowly music shopkeeper. His family couldn't remotely afford a private education, and in fact he left school at 15. He was almost entirely self-taught, and had a bit of a chip on his shoulder about that for the whole of his life. And he was a Roman Catholic, at a time when in staunchly Protestant England that still mattered. In 1902, the year of the coronation, the Dream of Gerontius was proposed for the Three Choirs Festival. The Bishop of Worcester, Elgar's hometown, objected, and he had strong